What if I told you that speech is only a very, very small part of communication? This is something that I've learned recently. I wanted to share it with you guys. Um, there's so much to communication that kind of goes without saying, literally. And I definitely want to take the time to teach you, hopefully, some of the things that I've learned recently, right? So, our body language, our facial expressions, and our hand gestures say a lot more about what we're up to than what we actually say. And these do not lie. We're not naturally made to be deceptive. So, you'll be able to read or see somebody if you're able to read these things. And I think it's very, very important. Before I go ahead and get it started, if you do not know who I am, my name is Champ, and I help men build their foundation of masculinity. A few things I want to say before I actually go ahead and get it started. Make sure you go and follow me on Twitch, TikTok, Rumble, and on Spotify at Life of a Champ Podcast on most platforms, as well on X. It's just Champ. It's just Life of a Champ and a dot. I'm pretty sure for on X if you want to see what I have to say on there as well. So yeah, there's a few things I wanted to cover within this podcast, and I kind of want to make it a little series with communication. So this is something that I have been recently studying, and something that has definitely been of one of my greatest interests, just for the simple fact that I thought that becoming good at speaking, which is why I wanted to pursue the podcast in the first place, is something that is a worthy endeavor, and you should really try your best to develop your ability to articulate words and your ability to speak and have a flow and have confidence with which in which you speak. And so I have developed that plenty over the last few years that I've had this podcast. And when I hear people say communication, or rather nonverbal communication, is more important than verbal communication, that made me think, and then I went down a deep rabbit hole that I will go ahead and share parts of it with you today. Um, so let's just get into it, man. So yes, most communication is nonverbal. What does that really mean, right? So like I said, your facial expressions, your body language, and your hand gestures are going to say a lot more about you than what your words will say. So for a person that really values speech, this was something that was like, wow, really, this is really how it is. And then I really began to think about it, right? There's certain things that you can kind of just feel within an interaction, that no words even need to be had, but a whole conversation could have been had, right? And I've noticed this with a lot of people that you probably talk to a lot. You can kind of infer certain things without them needing to say it, and they know, and you know exactly what they mean. And I think that's very, very interesting, because when people think of communication, the first thing they think about is speech. But if I were to tell you that other things are conveying a lot more than what you're even willing to expose within your speech, maybe you would think I'm crazy. But just observe life. Just go ahead and live life. Just go ahead and see things for yourself, and that might tell a different story. So I want to discuss a few things. So the first thing I want to discuss is body language, because that's something that I already mentioned. But body language is very, very important, right? The example that I want to use, that I think is very, very interesting, is, let's just say you had the perfect speech, right? You had the perfect pickup line to go talk to a woman, right? The exact thing that, let's just say there was some data behind this. I don't know how you would be able to do this or quantify this, but let's just say there was a perfect speech that you could have when it comes to going and talking to women, right? When your introduction or whatever, right? But if you weren't able to convey it in a confident manner, then it probably still wouldn't work. And I think that's interesting because, like I said, it could be perfect. You could say everything right. But if you're not being, and if you're not, yeah, essentially, if you're not being, then you aren't, right? Then you can't have, or I'm not going to say you can't have the conversation, but it's not going to go the way that you want it to go. Even if you knew exactly what to say, it still might not be enough. And I think that's very, very interesting, because I feel like there's a lot of people that they always want to know what right words to say. But it has nothing to do, I'm not going to say it has nothing to do. It has little to do with what you say, and has much more to do with who you are and how you carry yourself. That says everything that anyone would ever need to know about any situation. So yes, body language. So the first type of body language that I really want to discuss is open palm body language. This is going to be something that when somebody's speaking, they're speaking with their hands and they're speaking with obviously their palms facing you. This is going to be something that I kind of don't necessarily do a whole lot, or at least you can't see it on the camera, right? So this is very, very important because the more you're able to do it, and I wouldn't say don't necessarily do this in a way that's trying to um, don't do it in a way that's trying to, what is the word I'm looking for? Curate an interaction, right? Do it if you're. Here's the thing: a lot of people do this unconsciously, and I think it's very, very important. If if you need to work on this, right? But don't be disingenuous or disingenuous when you do this. So, like I said, if you're going to be a person that's going to be speaking more with their hands and have more open body language with this specifically, people are going to be more likely to trust you. And along with this, I think this is something else that I thought was very, very interesting, right? There are two more things, right? There is also, depending on their body language, right? So you can have open palm body language, and you can also have, let's just say your lower half of your body, right? How you're conveying that also can say a lot, right? If you're relaxed and your legs are just, in a relaxed state. Maybe they're a little spread and you're just, you're just chilling, right? That is going to be a lot more of open body language. And people, for whatever reason, when they come across a person that is in this relaxed, calm manner, they're going to be more likely to trust them. They're going to be more likely to want to engage with this person, and they're going to be more engaged with all these things, right? So yes, the person, if you look at a person who uses a lot of hand gestures and things like that, they're more likely to captivate someone's attention and build a better connection and just in general when it comes to communication. So that's something that I really want to um, discuss, right? And along with that, I also want to talk about the inverse, right? Closed palm. Maybe this is going to be a person who has his arms crossed, right? Maybe they're even covering their crotch area. That was something that I learned that I thought was absolutely interesting, right? When a person is more timid, when a person is more, let's just say, anxious, their fear response is going to be to cover their crotch in some type of way, or to cover their stomach. For women, it's usually covering their stomach, right? They'll put a. If you've seen a woman, if you ever seen a woman in, let's just say, a situation that maybe it's like an argumentative situation, women will a lot of women, they will put their arm across their stomach, right? And I had learned that that was a way, since it's a fear response, they're trying to put bones where there's not bones, so it's more protective, right? So I thought that was interesting. And also something is, men do it with their own, with their own junk. Women do it with, their uterus, right? So they're protecting, essentially protecting it without actually protecting it, right? They're putting something there. But if you see people in those type of states, right? If you begin to recognize that, let's just say somebody was relaxed, but a certain conversation was had, and now that person seems to be a lot more timid. Maybe they're crossing their legs, maybe they're putting their hands where their crotch is supposed to be, or maybe a woman, she's putting her arm around her stomach, right? Those are going to be all fear responses where a person is more likely to be in a state where they're lying, or they're scared, or they're just fearful of what they're currently experiencing. And I think that's very, very interesting for you to observe, because that can tell a lot more about the situation. And maybe you can recognize these things without even actually thinking about it. But I'm trying to, what I'm going to try to do over these next few episodes is I'm going to try to communicate what is rarely spoken in words, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of people that truly struggle with communication and just being sociable, right? Just having that social intelligence and having that social calibration to be able to distinguish a certain situation from another, and vice versa, right? So I think it's very, very interesting that just by how you're sitting, just by how you present yourself, that can say a whole lot about you. And yeah, I just think that's interesting. So open palm body language and closed palm body language. Be very, very aware of when you're doing these certain things, and more particularly the situations in which you're doing them, and more importantly, of course, when other people are doing them, right? What is a certain situation that would put a person in a position where they would need to, or feel the need to, you know, cross their arms or cover their crotch, or for a woman to cover her abdomen, right? And as opposed to, right? So if you're trying to, and I keep going back to this, and I'm gonna make a separate podcast for this, but I keep going back to like when you're dealing with a woman, right? If you're dealing with a woman, if you go up to her, you can tell, and I'm gonna say I can tell when a woman is, let's just say, more receptive to what I have to say as opposed to not, right? And like I said, it kind of goes back to that body language, right? And like Jaden had mentioned in the comments, energy is felt before words are spoken. That is 100% facts. So, with that being said, you should know. I'm not gonna say you should know. You should begin to try to distinguish whether someone's interested in you or whether someone isn't interested in you just based off of the body language that they give you, right? And that is something that's very, very key for sure. And also, facial expressions is something else I want to get into as well, right? I'm not going to go through all the certain type of facial expressions that do exist, but I would highly recommend for you to go ahead and research them yourself, right? If you don't know, I'm not going to say if you don't know. If you want to know more about facial expressions and what they really, really, really mean, I would highly, highly recommend tapping into this one podcast that I had watched. I had watched a podcast with Jack Neal, and I'm forgetting the other guy's name, but this guy was a body language expert, and he'd given me some of these things, and I had heard what he had to say, and I had taken a lot of what I had already learned before that, and I had wanted to combine it for an episode. That's what I'm doing today. But besides that, one thing I want to be very, very clear with, as when you're trying to evaluate somebody's body language, you must understand that not only are you reading people and should be constantly reading people, but people are constantly reading you. So you need to be really, really self-aware of what you're doing and when you're doing it, right? And if you're not getting the necessary response that you would like, start with yourself and say, am I exuding and displaying what I would like to exude and display, right? And if you aren't, which some people aren't, then you need to adjust something. Something needs to be adjusted, obviously, if it's not working. So yeah, I think that's very, very important. So hopefully that's something that interests you for sure. Give me 1 second. Let me read some of these comments. Closed body language can be from the person lacking confidence or feeling insecure as well. 100%. I 100% agree. Right. If you walk into a room and you're the best looking person, or if your confidence comes from your looks, right? You're gonna be more confident, right? As opposed to, let's just say you walk in a room and you're the ugliest person in the room. Maybe if your confidence comes from your looks, maybe you're gonna be less confident. Maybe you're not going to carry yourself a certain way. Maybe you're not going to be as open. Maybe you're going to be more closed off. Maybe your posture is not going to be as let's just say good. Let's just say your posture goes to shit, and yeah, let's just say that, right? So yeah, she's exactly right for sure. So one thing I also want to mention with this, and I thought this was very interesting because I had heard Jordan Peterson talk about this, and this is something that I really, really thought about in my own personal life situations and where I seen this exactly play out. But one of the untold secrets of communication is the fact that we raise each other. And when I say that, you're probably thinking, what the hell are you talking about, right? But just hear me out. We essentially raise each other, even past the age of just being a child, right? You're constantly being raised by society and by the people that are in your environment, right? So what that means is this, right? Let's just say you're in a situation with certain people and you tell a joke, and the joke doesn't go very, very good, right? Let's just say the joke isn't funny to the people that you're around and you expected people to laugh, and now they didn't laugh. Maybe they gave you some dirty looks. Maybe they turned away from you. Maybe they stopped talking directly to you, right? Maybe their body language changed, right? If you're able to recognize all these certain things, and hopefully you can feel when these things happen as opposed to needing to observe these things. And that's something that I also want to really, really display and convey is some of these things you don't necessarily need to be overly observant. I'm not saying go in the room and always, well, what is this person's body language saying, right? I'm saying you need to have a firm understanding of these things, I believe. And then when you go out into the world, hopefully the knowledge that you've learned will come almost second nature to you when it comes to evaluating your environment and the situations that you're in. So going back to what I was saying, right? If you make a joke, no one laughs. Maybe that's going to be a point where you need to go ahead and reflect on what went wrong, and it might teach you about what is okay and what is not okay to say. And that is the raising, right? You raise somebody like that, right? Let's just say you're in a group setting, and I'll give you this one example. I'm not going to use any names specifically. I was hanging out with my friends, and one friend made a joke and tried to joke in a way with another friend that we don't necessarily joke with that friend in that specific way. Maybe we do that to, let's just say, maybe we do it to a few of the people in the group, but we don't do it to this one person, right? For whatever reason, right? And that person didn't laugh because obviously that's not how they typically joke around with, they joke around. So therefore, that person was now checked and now moving forward would have learned to not move in that specific way, which I think is interesting, right? And another way I think people really raise each other is, let's just say you're having a conversation, right? Let's just say you're rambling on for a long time and you can see this person is losing interest in what you have to say. So maybe you either change the subject, or maybe you open it up to them for them to speak, and maybe that will allow them to be a lot more engaged. But you can really gauge a person's interest and level of conversations that you're having, um, just by seeing if anything changes from the initial point of when you're having the conversation, as opposed to, let's just say, 5 or 10 minutes down the line. Maybe they're making a little less eye contact from you. Maybe they're not facing you like they once were. And those are all signs that a person maybe is losing interest in what you have to say. So that is another way in which people would raise each other, right? If I'm having a conversation with anyone and it gets to the point where I don't want to hear what they have to say. I'm not saying this to be rude, but this just goes with anyone, right? If anyone says anything that you don't really want to hear, you're going to act a certain way, right? And since in knowing that, you should also know when you're doing that to someone, right? I think it's very important because I feel like a lot of these things people can recognize, um, or a lot of these things people can feel within themselves, but they don't necessarily look outward in this specific way that would allow them to evaluate their environment to see if these certain things could be possibly felt by other people, which I think is very important. So, like I said, you know how it feels to lose interest in a conversation that maybe you're doing it right now, hopefully not, but let's just say you're losing interest in a conversation, right? You're going to do certain things. So, like I said, when you're having a conversation with someone, if they start to do or start to act those certain ways, you need to, like I said, you need to make an adjustment essentially, right? And that is going to raise you because now maybe you know, oh, maybe I shouldn't speak as much, or maybe I should keep it shorter. Maybe I should add a little bit more, whatever. Maybe I should add more, you know, hand gestures and things like that, right? So that might be something that might be something that you need to think about for sure. So, but getting into it, a few things I also want to mention that I think are very interesting as well. So when it comes to communication, right? Like I said, the untold secrets of communication. The thing that I've observed, and the thing that is observed by many people as well, is some people have intuition, some people have a feeling, some people get a vibe, and these are things that are necessarily something that you can't necessarily explain, not completely, right? And what I've seen more common than not is women have definitely been a lot more intuitive. They know things when they're not. I'm not going to say they're not supposed to know things, but essentially when they're not supposed to know things, right? They just know things. They just can figure things out. They can just, for whatever reason, they get an impulse, and that impulse can be all telling, right? So I think that's very interesting. And if you think about it, this is something I've thought about, of course. Women are obviously the more vulnerable sex, so they kind of have to be like a super aware of their environment, and if they're not, it could be costly, right? Because they're more vulnerable. They're smaller and weaker than men, right? So the advantage that women have, that they naturally or socially are developed into having, is very keen social calibration, right? Or the social intelligence. I'll say social intelligence, and that's why I would say you don't really find too many awkward women. You find a lot more awkward men, at least through my own personal experience. So, with that being said, obviously they're the more vulnerable sex, so they have to have more of a social. They have to have a higher social IQ, and obviously that's going to lead to more or to better social ability and to better intuition. So they're going to be able to see things and feel things and notice things in their environment that might not even be fully explainable, but they feel that. And I think that's interesting, right? That is something that is so fascinating. And of course, there's going to be men that have intuition as well. Yeah, trusting your gut. Obviously, I'm sure you've heard that before, but nonetheless, I think that's something that is super underrated and not as talked about as it should be, in my opinion. So, all right, getting into it. So, I want to this is kind of going a little bit off topic, but I want to talk about certain things that I have been learning, right? So, I've heard a few things being talked about nonverbal communication within my books and the podcasts that I've been reading recently. There's two things that I think are very interesting. Number one, they talk about communication being nonverbal, right? Things that are necessarily they can't really be explained. They are the unexplainable, right? And then you have one of those things being symbols, right? And when I mean symbols, you're probably thinking, what the hell are you talking about, right? So what I mean by that is this, right? So I'll go back on the first thing, right? Nonverbal communication, essentially, that there are things that symbolize certain things without needing to be fully expressed. So for example, I'll just give you an example of one, right? The symbol of fire, right? It's super primitive. It's super it's a caveman shit, right? It's caveman shit, right? So fire. Fire could mean destruction. Fire can mean warmth. Fire can mean, you see what I'm saying? It can mean a lot of things without needing to say that specific thing, right? And that was one of the things that I've seen as a common theme within um, a lot of the things that I've been consuming recently, talking about images and symbols of the mind are important, and they transcend essentially speech. There are certain things that are ineffable, right? And with that being said, those things, since they're unexplained, those those should be something that should be a lot more thoroughly analyzed as opposed to the speech, because there are things that there are ways in which we communicate that aren't speech, that are through symbols, that are through images, that are through things that truly cannot be verbalized, right? And I think that's so interesting. So yes, like I said, the symbols and symbols can be a lot of different things. I'm not going to really explain too many of the symbols, and maybe I'll do that on the next one. But yeah, symbols and images, they can mean a whole lot without they can tell an entire story without needing to say anything at all. So I thought that was very interesting. And I'm gonna give you a few more things that I've learned as well that I think are interesting, and then I'll go ahead and end it off. But I'm gonna be making two more podcasts that are going to be around social intelligence and social calibration. So if you're interested and you did like this and did enjoy this episode, tap in with those ones in the future as well. So the last thing that I want to talk about that I think is in accordance to facial expressions and body language, that I think is something that is so key, and something that I've been a lot more observant of ever since I've heard it, is this thing called blink rate. It's something that is truly unconscious, but it can truly tell the truest story of how a person feels about a certain thing, right? So, for example, right, let's just say you're blinking a whole lot. You're in a situation where you're blinking a whole lot. What does that even really mean? That means you're less focused, number one. That means maybe you're a lot more timid. Maybe you're less confident. Maybe you're more anxious. And those are going to be all high stress responses, right? If you're a person that is, let's just say you have a slower blink rate, maybe you're more focused. Maybe you're more confident. Maybe you're less anxious. And maybe you're not stressing at all, right? Maybe you're just calm and focused. So that is something that I feel like ever since I've heard that, I thought that was so interesting. So let's just say you're watching something like a movie, or let's just say you're watching something like this podcast, and your blinks, you're blinking maybe like a few times a minute, right? That blinking rate is like, let's just say I can't remember the specific numbers that this guy talked about, but I think it was like 15 to 17 is normal, right? If it exceeds that into like the 40s and 50s, then you're in a high stress response. And if it even gets lower than that, like let's just say like 6 or 7 a minute, then you're highly focused and engaged. So this can say a whole lot, right? Like I had mentioned earlier with when I was referring to the joke that isn't funny, or that's being had, right? The person who's blinking a whole lot, it could say a whole lot about the situation without even really needing to say anything. If you're able to read somebody's body language, right, and say, oh, this person is definitely not as interested as they once were. Maybe they're blinking a whole lot. Maybe they're not looking at you. Then you're going to be like, okay, well, that's obvious, right? But it's not necessarily as obvious as you think. So I'm not saying you need to be counting people's how many times they blink per minute. I'm saying this is something that I think you should be mindful of and start to notice. Say, and maybe once you realize and come to the conclusion that this person is now thinking this specific way, begin to be observant of their body language. Right? Look at their blinks. Just observe their body language. That's all I have to say. Right? And obviously something I want to mention as well. Right? The more interested someone is, the less they will blink. Right? If you're highly focused on this podcast or a movie, you're going to be a person that's not going to be blinking as much because you're going to be highly engaged, you're going to be focused, you're going to be thinking, and you're not going to want to miss out with what is going to be next. So you can really gauge if a person likes or dislikes the conversation, and more importantly, if you're really highly observant, then you can also see what specific conversations and what specific subjects really lead to more blinking or less blinking. So I think that's all very interesting. But those are the untold secrets of communication. And like I said, I'm going to do my best to try to explain what I believe to be very hard to explain, and some would even say unexplainable, right? Ineffable. So other than that, I really don't have too much else to say. I'm so glad to be back, and I'm looking forward to making more podcasts and doing more live streams here very soon. So if you enjoyed, feel free to tap in with the next podcast on Thursday. I go live every Thursday, or at least I try to. Also tap in on Mondays as well. I'm going to go live. I'm going to be a little bit more relaxed and going to have a lot more of a different type of conversation. So tap in with that for sure. But other than that, just follow me on Twitch, TikTok, Rumble, and on Spotify at Life of a Champ Podcast. And other than that, I'll leave you guys off with the podcast motto. Fellas out here, man, we don't just work around here, man. We outwork. So make sure y'all work with these motherfuckers, because you know that I am, and you know that everyone else around me is. And it's just like that, man. Y'all have a good night. Tap with the next podcast on Thursday. And those were the untold secrets of communication. Y'all have a good night.